Hi, welcome back. We are starting Unit 8. This is 8.1, Sources of Pollution. Our learning objectives are to identify differences between point and non-point sources of pollution. So these are how we are going to categorize pollution, and we'll start with point source. So point source pollution is exactly what it sounds like. It's pollution that enters the environment from a single source and can clearly be identified. So in the examples that we're seeing here with this polluted water, we see that there is a very specific point where effluent or waste or sewage is being dumped into the water, or perhaps here a very specific point, we've got maybe nuclear waste being added to the water, or maybe here we've got a coal burning or some type of power plant that is emitting a type of air pollution. But in every single one of these instances, it's very clear where the pollution is coming from. So there's a lot of different types of point source pollution, but the big idea here is that point source pollution is easier to target and treat because it's clear where the pollution is coming from, and we can, once we've identified the problem, can make changes in order to prevent it from continually being a problem. So some of the point source types of pollutions that we see in this class: wastewater treatment plants and that effluent being added to water. In fact, recently our sewage treatment plant in Long Beach just dumped about 40,000 gallons of sewage into the ocean. So that was kind of problematic, but again, an example of point source because we knew exactly where the waste came from. Electronic or automobile manufacturers often have waste that ends up in waterways. Oil refineries have a lot of byproducts that have waste that could potentially end up in waterways. CAFOs, you guys have learned about, or leaking underground gasoline storage. All these are examples of a very clear source of where pollution is coming from. Now, a lot of places are allowed to actually dump waste into water as long as it abides by the EPA standards for that waste being allowed to be added to water. That varies based on the type of effluent you're dumping. So as long as you are abiding by the EPA standards for that effluent, you are within the realms of the Clean Water Act. But usually before you dump water or effluent, it has to be treated. You can't just dump a bunch of waste into water. And that's basically what the Clean Water Act says. Now, non-point source pollution is pollution that can't be tracked to a single point or property. There's a lot of examples of this, but you're kind of seeing in the image here that you've got one body of water and multiple sources along that body of water that are possibly contributing to the waste or to the pollution that is that body of water. So we're seeing agriculture, industrial, natural, urban, residential. And so when we say that the water is polluted and people say, well, why is the water polluted? We can't identify any one clear source. And there's actually a really great example of this. It's the Mississippi River. So the Mississippi River connects over 40% of the United States to one spot. That is the Mississippi River. There's a bunch of watersheds that all connect to each other that eventually dump into this river. This river directly touches 10 states, and you can see that it spans almost the entire width of the United States. It dumps into the Gulf of Mexico, right off the coast of Louisiana. So you can imagine that when we talk about non-point source pollution, this is sort of the perfect examples. Pollution could be happening anywhere along any of these rivers that dump eventually into this watershed. So this, when we say, why is the Mississippi polluted? I mean, it could be coming all the way from the river near Billings, Montana, or the river near Nashville, Tennessee, right? I mean, we could be coming from anywhere. So as a result, this river becomes very, very polluted, and where this river dumps, the Gulf of Mexico, is actually one of the most polluted places in North America. This water is highly hypoxic. Nothing lives there. It's very eutrophic. And this is largely the result of a lot of runoff. A lot of the runoff that ends up in this river comes from agriculture. So it's too nutrient rich, too many phosphates, too many nitrates, causing eutrophication essentially here in the Gulf of Mexico. So I already kind of mentioned some of these sources, but agriculture is a big non-point source pollutant, especially if you're in an area where there's a lot of agricultural fields or areas that are all running near a nearby water source, and they're treating their fields with fertilizers, herbicides, insecticides. Those can run off into watersheds or into bodies of water. Other things may be any type of water that's running off of non-porous surfaces, could be snowmelt, rain, irrigation from parking lots. Those are going to contain oils, grease, and other toxic chemicals, and those can definitely be problematic as well. One of the biggest non-point source pollutants is going to be sediment. So sediments are going to be particulates of sand, gravel, clay from improperly managed like construction sites, forest lands, eroding streams and banks. Sedimentation is largely problematic because it changes the visibility or turbidity of the water. And so it doesn't seem like the same type of pollution as oil or eutrophication or something like that, but it changes the clarity of the water, it changes the temperature of the water, and that affects the range of tolerance of species who are then living in that area. So we care about sedimentation and how sedimentation or sediments are treated in land that is being manipulated near waterways, so specifically construction sites or things that are subject to soil erosion like deforested lands. So the biggest difference, of course, is that point source pollution generally tends to be a lot easier to deal with. When we have one point source problem, we can clearly identify it, we can clearly figure out a solution, and we can prevent that type of pollution from occurring. Non-point sources are definitely more challenging. It sort of presents itself in a tragedy of the commons type scenario because the people in Billings, Montana, who live on that river, who may be polluting with agricultural waste, don't really care what's happening in the Mississippi River because none of it directly impacts them. They also may not be intentionally trying to pollute the Mississippi River and intentionally create more hypoxic conditions in the Gulf of Mexico. So we would also consider this a negative externality. It's a challenging problem to try to fix, and really the only way we can do that is to try to incentivize people to be cautious with where their waste is being dumped in all of those places. You can try. There is regulation, there is laws to try to prevent that, but ultimately you sometimes have a tragedy of the commons type situation. So non-point source pollution can be challenging to fix. Okay, I think that's it. Let me know if you guys have questions, and I'll see you in class. Thanks.